We're starting.
All right, we're live. Hello and welcome to the My RD Journey Podcast. My name is Adam, producer and co-host, and with me, of course, is Felicia Peraza of Peraza Nutrition, PerazaNutrition.com, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, MySpace.
No, every time.
So what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about why you should specialize as a dietitian and a little bit about the scope of practice and then also finding your niche.
MySpace is still a thing, by the way. I'm tired of your sass about MySpace.
No one uses
MySpace. So finding your niche, they don't. Finding your niche is, what's a niche? What are we talking about?
So basically, this is your business focus or something specific that you would specialize in. So it could be super broad in the aspect of maybe focusing on diabetes, or you can even get that even more specialized to say diabetic people who have diabetes and maybe that are children. So you might specialize in pediatric diabetes.
So you consider diabetes to be a rather broad specialization, not quite enough of a niche, or?
Yeah, because when you think about it, someone can specialize in diabetes, but maybe work with athletes or kids or
like diabetic athletes?
Yeah, like type 1 diabetes. So someone who might be a runner and managing their blood sugar along with, insulin and how to kind of support their workouts without bottoming out.
And other things dealing with diabetes. Are there certain popular niches or let me ask you this. Are there certain niches that are underserved currently?
Yes. Kind of the thyroid health and that kind of scope, like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, anything related to thyroid. Cancer is kind of another one too, like oncology outpatient. There's a lot of inpatient dietitians that work in oncology, but not necessarily outpatient.
Not enough outpatient dietitians for oncology.
Yeah. And then also, this is kind of getting bigger, but like plant-based nutrition or vegan nutrition, but also for families and kids. So there's a lot of dietitians that are kind of getting into this space a little bit more, but that's kind of less served.
Okay, yeah, just curious. There are some opportunities to niche down. So, should you have a niche? Is that wise to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely. The whole idea of people thinking with a niche is that you are, specializing, so you're cutting out all these people and you're not going to have as many clients. And I actually kind of find the opposite. That it's better to have the niche because you end up getting more clients because people might specifically look for a dietitian who specializes in IBS or specializes in diabetes for adults or specializes in, cardiovascular diseases. So
is the world of dietetics so big and so populated with dietitians that having a niche is kind of a good idea, would you say?
Yeah, because I mean, in terms of where dietitians can practice, they could practice really anywhere. And if you're thinking just in the outpatient, like private practice arena, a lot of people just go into private practice and see everybody. And so being able to kind of specialize can set you apart. So.
Yeah, there's a principle with that where it's like, if you're going to buy a book about how to train dogs, and if the book is about, German Shepherds and you have a German Shepherd, you're going to go for that one versus the one called How to Train Dogs. A German Shepherd's going to buy the one called How to Train a German Shepherd. So that makes sense. If you have diabetes or you're a T1 athlete or whatever, and you see a dietitian, find one that specializes in that thing. Of course, you're more likely to go to that person. But is there a downside to having a niche then? Would you maybe rule yourself out of certain clients, or are you less valued as a generalist in that case?
I think it really depends. I mean, I still think people honestly don't really know what a dietitian does and how we can kind of help.
Well, that's why I'm asking if niching down is even important to do at this point.
I mean, honestly, I think so. And I think this is kind of what sets dietitians apart from like maybe a health coach or just a general like nutritionist who maybe isn't a dietitian, is that, we can practice what's called medical nutrition therapy. So like specializing in that therapeutic diet approach, which would be things like diabetes and heart disease and cancer and all of those kinds of things. So being able to kind of hone in on one of those areas as the dietitian, I feel like would then set you apart from other maybe health professionals as well. So I don't necessarily think that there's a downside. And honestly, I also feel like it made it a lot easier for me to kind of create content, to focus on like social media or blogs and to have like a specific focus, because there's so much you could talk about with nutrition. When you have like a more clear focus, it makes it a little easier. So
do you have a niche?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as, I would say, specific as maybe I could be, but plant-based nutrition is the focus, and then also like preventative wellness and how plant-based diets and styles of eating can support that, in terms of diabetes management, high cholesterol, that kind of thing.
So plant-based nutrition is sort of your niche.
Yeah. And then beginner strength training for the personal trainer part. I don't work with like super athletes or anything like that. So
there are no downsides that you can imagine to niching down at all?
Honestly, I don't think so. The only thing I would say is maybe your area, if maybe, and I think it kind of comes across as how you're going to practice, where you're practicing. Are you seeing people face to face? Are you working with particular doctors? Because if you work with, let's just say, primary care physicians, obviously they see a variety of clients. And so if you see any client, you might get more referrals. But then if you hook up with maybe a cardiologist and you specialize in heart disease, then that is a great referral source directly for that. So I think it kind of really still depends on how you then market yourself and who you might talk to kind of express your services.
Okay, so we're not saying it'll rule you out for any clients. There's really no downside to having a specific niche. Can you have more than one?
You can, although I'm always cautious, and I don't know if other people feel the same, but I'm always cautious when I look at someone's website, whether it's for dietitians or anything else, and I see like 15 different specialties that are like running the gambit, and it's just one person. So they're not necessarily in a practice where they have multiple dietitians, only because, as a dietitian, we have a broad knowledge and we're taught about different conditions. And obviously you want to be able to know about things like diabetes and high cholesterol, all that kind of stuff. But to really keep up to date on the latest research, I always kind of question, can you keep up with all of these specialties? Can you keep up with all the continuing education? Can you keep up with the latest research on them to best kind of serve your clients?
So in order to have a niche, you feel as though that niche needs to be your specialty to the degree that you have absolute up-to-date knowledge of that specialization. And if someone lists a dozen or more specializations, it's starting to seem like, okay, what exactly are you specializing in?
Yeah, exactly. And then you also think about, and you still, again, you want to have a broad knowledge of different conditions, because likely you won't just see one client you won't see a client that has one condition. Like a lot of people have diabetes and high cholesterol. A lot of people might have IBS. That tends to be, a lot of the clients I work with have diabetes and IBS. And so, you want to have a broad knowledge to be able to help people and not feel stuck that you can't work with anybody.
Okay, so there are specializations that are sort of tangentially related, and it makes sense to have overlapping specializations, because oftentimes one condition can cause or affect another, or you see people with multiple conditions very often, so it helps to specialize in those 2, 3, 4 conditions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like for me, I don't work with clients who have eating disorders. It's not my wheelhouse. I'm aware of what eating disorders are, obviously, and I had that in part of my internship.
You have a base knowledge.
Exactly.
But you would probably refer that person out to somebody who is a specializing dietitian in that area, because you would feel less adequate for providing them with care.
Yeah, and that's the point, is that I don't feel like I could provide them with the best quality care that someone who works with those who struggle with eating disorders day in and day out. So
this is kind of a counterintuitive thing in terms of any kind of profession. You want people to think that you're the end-all be-all for everything that is whatever your industry is, and it's counterintuitive to think, okay, I'm not an expert in this particular sliver of my field, I should refer this person out, because then you feel like you're losing clients. There's probably, much like any other industry, there's probably a mentality of scarcity where it's like more, me, I want all the clients. And it takes a sort of, entrepreneurial maturity to refer clients out to someone else who is better specialized with whatever that person actually needs. I would think that that's a tough thing for someone to actually manage to do. How do you recommend people get comfortable with that notion? I mean, this kind of ties into networking and why it's important to do that as a dietitian. We've touched on that before, but how do you recommend people get comfortable with saying to someone that they're not the best person for them and to refer out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually something recently I've had to kind of do that with a few clients who, like chronic kidney disease. Obviously that's something I'm aware of and I know information about it, but I don't know the ins and outs of like dialysis and, the requirements and all of that. And I'm just not as keen as to even the products that kind of go along with it and the medication. So I actually had a client who was going through dialysis and was actually looking to do outpatient services. And this was actually an email, so it was a little easier, I should say. But I just said to them, like, this is not an area that I specialize in. However, I can refer you to another dietitian, or I can provide you with like a database to search for one. But being able to have a network of dietitians actually is really helpful, because then if you refer to them, they're more likely to then refer to you. And if everybody has different specialties, you're not really competing with one another. And even if you have same specialties,
How do you promote the attitude that it's okay to specialize and it's okay to tell someone that you're not the best person, though? Because I have a feeling that a lot of dietitians are not going to be on board with you if they're just getting into private practice. That mentality early on is probably like, I don't have enough clients, I'm not busy enough, am I going to make money? How can I afford to tell someone I'm not the right dietitian for them? What do you recommend people do mentally to shift into that?
I think sometimes that just comes with practice. And also when you're first starting out, especially for me, I didn't really know where I wanted to specialize. And I kind of did see everybody. And I just thought of myself as being like a general dietitian. And I saw lots of different general conditions. And then I started to figure out that there were certain conditions that I wasn't too keen on seeing. And I wasn't as excited about those appointments. And that wasn't really my passion. And so being able to kind of recognize that, and it's hard to do in the beginning when you don't have the clientele. And so I think reminding yourself that if someone is looking for a particular specialty, like if they're looking for, they have GI issues and they're looking for a dietitian and you are the one that specializes in it, they're going to want to come to you. So I think reminding yourself of that and building that track record of being the dietitian who specializes in GI or IBS, whatever it is. But just kind of practice, keep doing it.
So this might not be something that someone starts out doing. This could be sort of an advanced thing that once you're kind of getting going and you have some momentum with your practice, maybe you consider shifting into and kind of acquainting yourself with the idea of specializing and of not serving every client. Because when you first start your practice, I mean, you did some stuff that, you did some cooking classes at one point. You did some things that were what you would probably consider now way outside of your scope. But in the beginning, when you're first starting building your business, you kind of just take whatever work you get.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that's obviously what I did. And a lot of people don't, even people that are a couple years into practice might not even know what they want to specialize in. And there might be clients, that hard and fast clients that they're like, okay, I absolutely will refer this client out. Like a lot of dietitians I work with will refer out like for eating disorders, but they feel comfortable working with diabetes, obviously, and cardiovascular disease and any kind of GI related issues. But then the more they get, deeper into practice, the more clients they work with, maybe different programs they run, they start to find like what they're passionate about, what appointments get them excited and kind of fired up and they're excited to do. And that can help them kind of identify where their passion might lie. Or maybe they just see a lot of the same kind of clients and they notice that that's pretty big in their area. And so they're like, maybe I should focus in on this.
So that, I think, is a smart way to determine your niche. But it depends on where you are and I guess, what your market is asking for. We live in a big city and there's a lot of access to people. There's a lot of people here. Other people who live in maybe a more rural area or don't have as high a population of people, this may differ depending on your mileage may vary depending on where you are. So we kind of mentioned scope of practice a little bit, and I think you have to really define. I assume you have to really define what a dietitian's scope of practice is to even decide, okay, where can my niche be within that? And a dietitian starting out is going to just do everything. I would assume you have to figure out what you like first.
Yeah.
So should we spend some time on what the general scope of practice even is for dietitians to then kind of sparse out into niches?
Yeah. So the the general scope of practice, and the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics it's a free, so you don't have to be a member to download it. They have a revised 2017, which is the latest scope of practice for just general registered dietitians, and then they also have one for registered dietitian techs, so DTRs, as well, and it's a really long document that goes through all the scope of practice. And they also have a tool where you're able to actually put in and answer questions and figure out like your scope of practice. But anything that relates to assessing nutrition related needs, supplement and drug interaction, food drug interactions, evaluating someone's diet, doing a full nutrition assessment, which is going to involve, things like someone's medical history, their height, their weight, calculating their, body fat percentage, all of that kind of stuff. And then also what's called a nutrition diagnosis or a PES statement, which is problem, etiology, signs and symptoms. So it's usually something like it's nutrition related. So, inadequate knowledge or altered nutrition related labs. And if you've maybe just gotten out of your internship, you've probably written many of these. We wrote a ton of them in undergrad. But then you're able to also, within the scope of practice, you tailor nutrition intervention. So I mentioned medical nutrition therapy earlier. So this would be figuring out someone's nutrient needs. So calculating calories, fats, proteins, micronutrients, all of those things to whether optimize health or manage a chronic disease like diabetes and kind of intervene. So all of that. And again, it's generalized. It doesn't say like, we are able to specialize just in diabetes or just in this. The general scope includes all of those. And then there's like subgenres and all those. That's where you start niching down, right? Yeah.
Okay. Well, does the scope of practice vary depending on where you are?
Not necessarily. So generally, like state by state, mostly everything overlaps. There's exceptions with like order writing privileges in hospital settings and like long-term care facilities where dietitians are able to order like supplements and tube feedings, and some dietitians are not. So that was something newer. But in general, the scope of practice wouldn't necessarily vary by state. There are some, for credentialed practitioners though, the scope of practice is generally under the CDR, and we're talking United States, actually, I should say that. So the scope may vary in other countries.
What's CDR?
The Commission on Dietetics Regulation. So that's where our credential goes through.
And is that exclusive to the United States?
Yes.
Whatever. Yeah. The organization.
Canada has their own, and the UK has a different one as well.
So that varies depending on where you are geographically.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff can change depending on not only the state, but the country.
Yeah, general scope of practice by state is pretty similar. There, again, may be differences in like order writing privileges or what they might have in terms of like, do they call people dietitians or licensed nutritionists, like those kinds of terminologies. And those things are all available on your individual state website, the Department of the State. You could download the document on search for nutrition and you'll be able to find the information.
Okay, but then, all right, so the scope of practice, if someone decides to specialize, does the scope of practice then change?
Yeah, so if you do pick a specialty...
So wait, hold on. Is picking a specialization like an official thing?
No, it's not. And even if you read through the document on like the scope of practice, it's all based on the competency of the dietitian and, what education they have. Obviously, everyone goes through it, the accredited programs and the internships and all that. And again, United States, I'm talking about. But there's no like hard and fast where you're like, I'm a specialist. There's some specialty certifications, but that's where it's really up to the dietitian to.
So you can just say you specialize in literally anything.
Really, yeah.
So you have to be careful there because if like the person you mentioned, if someone specializes in like 15 things, you're not probably specializing in any of those things. Maybe you do a few of them, but how could you keep up with everything? And how do you prove that?
Exactly. And it's not like, this is where it's like, not like with doctors, you pick a specialty like your cardiologist, like it's not like that for dietitians where it's like a hard and fast, you're picking a certain specialty necessarily. It's kind of really fluid, I would say.
Well, does that give any indication that the field doesn't particularly need specialization as it is right now?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think the more honestly, though, with how much information there is about nutrition and science and all that, there's so many facets of nutrition that it is kind of hard to keep up with everything all at once. Like the latest guidelines for chronic kidney disease are not the ones that I keep up with. I'm keeping up with, I know of them and I know where to find the information, but I'm keeping up with and the latest products and all of that. So I still feel like it's useful to specialize to make sure you're honing in on the most accurate information to provide your client with the best service.
Okay, so if someone is specializing in something and someone is especially competent in a particular area, what does that look like? What differentiates that person as a specialist? What would they know that other people wouldn't know?
So basically, and how they define competency in the document is that they're able to provide safe and reliable services on a consistent basis. So you're able to take that information and apply it to clients on a consistent basis, obviously tailored to their needs, but it's consistent recommendations and interventions that you're providing. So you understand the knowledge, you are up to date with the knowledge, the skills, you're making sound decisions based on the science and the data that you have, you communicate effectively. So all of those are kind of like umbrella terms under that scope of practice.
That all sounds very subjective.
It is. And that's
so this whole thing seems kind of wishy-washy.
It is. And that's where it's really up to the dietitian to make sure you're practicing within what you know, and that's why I'm always a little cautious about when I see people with 15, I did see someone, 15 different specialties ranging, and it was one dietitian, and, I'm very supportive of all dietitians, but that just makes me wonder,
Well, I think it's pretty obvious what a person's doing if they're stating overtly that they specialize in 15 different things. Mm-hmm. They're a generalist. They don't have a specialization. Maybe they know a little bit more about 2 or 3 of those things than the rest, but they don't have a deep knowledge of any of those things. Dietetics is a very advanced field. From the limited knowledge that I have, there's so many different things that dietetics affects, and if there are 20, 30 niches to dig into and specialize in, there's no way that you're actually going to be a bona fide expert in more than a few of those things. Think about anything else you're doing in your life. If you play music, are you going to be able to specialize in 15 different instruments and actually be competent and good at all of them? Unless you're Michael Jackson, you're probably not. I mean, most people aren't the Michael Jacksons of dietetics are few and far between.
Yeah.
It's not like everybody's running around able to be an absolute expert in all of these fields. And I think what people do when they decide to say, "Oh, I specialize in these 15 things," what they're saying is kind of, it's not that deep. Mm-hmm. They're kind of belittling each of those specializations in a sense, because there's no way that you're able to dig that deep in a dozen or more topics when there's so much to know. Mm-hmm. Or you're deciding that being a specialist in an area is not much deeper than the surface level knowledge that any dietitian would have.
Yeah. And I think even outside of the really hard science and education piece, there's also the aspect of being submersed in a certain area opens you up to a lot of other things. And what I mean by that is I'm vegan or plant-based.
Oh my God. It's so unbelievable. I didn't know you were a conspiracy theorist.
When I know a lot of different products that are obviously dairy-free and vegan and plant-based, and have tried a lot of different ones too. And so when I have a client who is asking about a plant-based cheese, I'm able to rattle off different brands and which ones tasted better than others. And that's not necessarily, just about the hard and fast science and nutrition, but even just that aspect, being able to better help your clients. And so same with IBS friendly products or, things that are, geared towards those with kidney disease.
Yeah, especially attuned to specific things. That's kind of a general life thing. So what ends up happening is when you dig deep into a specific thing, you do it all the time, you submerge yourself. Like you're saying, you start to pick up things that are way less than obvious. You start to notice patterns with things, or you start to notice little things that matter, little things that make a difference, that give you an edge in that thing. It's happened to me with other things. I played baseball in high school. A few years in, I started to notice different things about the way I can twist my wrist a little differently when I release the ball, or if I change my grip a half an inch on the bat, it has this effect on the way I hit the ball. There's all kinds of things that matter, little things, and that's sort of a life thing. When you specialize in something, you dig really deep, you submerge yourself, you see it differently. It's like a language that you become not only fluent in, but you master it. And it's good to master something, because if you're going to go somewhere and see somebody like, I don't want to get too personal, but like someone in the family is having surgery soon, and they are going to see somebody who not only specializes in the surgery, but they invented the thing that the guy's going to use for the surgery. He invented it. Who are you going to trust? Someone who's good at doing the surgery, or someone who invented the thing that they use for the surgery? Come on, and you can make yourself that person if you specialize. You can make yourself an expert. You end up being able to talk about this stuff in a different way. You can tell when someone is an expert in a thing because they can just pull out all this weird and specific knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's bizarre, and it's stuff that you would never think. There's so much to know about all of these niches, and if someone decides they specialize in 15 things, they don't specialize in anything. You just don't. There's a lot of parallels with other stuff in life that like a chef who says they specialize in literally everything. No chef specializes in Asian and Mexican cuisine. You just don't. Because if you don't dig deep into one of those things, there's all kinds of little things that you're going to miss, that you're not going to have when someone who does specialize in just that one thing, that's all they do. Weirdly deep knowledge that brings out the little things that matter.
Yeah.
So dietetics is no different. It's just like anything else. You do want to niche down, and you're not going to see it at first. But it's kind of like, I always use the analogy of like when you start learning about something, the more you learn, the more you discover there is to know.
Yeah.
and to me, the analogy I always use for that is like you're in a giant room and it's dark, and your knowledge, the gain in knowledge that you have, there's a little light in the middle of the room. And when you gain some knowledge, the light turns on, and you can see more of your surroundings. So you discover there's a lot more in this room than you thought. So when you gain more knowledge, the light gets brighter, you can see more. But now you can see that the room is a greater expanse, and there's more stuff that you can't quite see. And the brighter the light gets, the more you see, and the more you learn that there is to know. And it's a never-ending thing. The room has no walls. I mean, there's just an infinite amount of information to know about any of these things specifically.
Yeah.
So it does help to specialize. And man, like from playing baseball and playing music, like I've played drums my whole life. I can tell you, I can look at a drummer, and I can tell whether or not he practices every day and he only plays drums, or he's like a hobbyist drummer that kind of plays, but he dabbles in other things. It's so obvious. Those little things stand out so prominently when you're in that field. I'm sure you know it with dietetics. When you refer someone to somebody who's a kidney specialist or something, that person knows things that you won't know and you can't know because you didn't dig. And then it's like all the other little things that you discover when you dig, that take you on little side roads. There's so much to know.
There is so much to know. And I almost think of it as playing the long game too, when you're, specializing and finding your niche. And, even outside, we're talking a lot about like individual clients and that kind of thing, but even for like presentations, like I've been on a couple of different planning committees, and I'm on a couple now. And, we're talking about like finding someone who is an expert in this topic. And we're not looking at the dietitians who might have 15 different specialties. We're looking at the person whose content and whose, website screams this specialty. And so we're going for that person and asking them, not them even putting in a proposal, us asking them to present on that topic because they specialize in. So it's not just the individual side, but also this can open you up for, presentations as well.
Okay, so I think we've kind of drilled in that it is important to have a niche. We've talked about it. We've talked about what niches are even, and kind of what some of them are within dietetics. You mentioned plant-based nutrition, kidney specialization. I imagine every chronic illness could be a specialization, or any major organ really. Someone could be an expert in like the liver for dietetics. I mean, I'm sure that exists, or there's maybe a need for it in some way.
Yeah, and there's also like some people do like specialties in endocrine. So diabetes obviously would fall into that, but also like weight management, sports nutrition is another big one. But then that's where sports nutrition and plant-based, or sports nutrition and you can obviously combine two things together. But there are specific documents that focus on those scopes of practice that we mentioned, like diabetes, eating disorders. Mental health is also another one, mental and behavioral health, which one of the documents focuses on eating disorders and then also mental health conditions. So like, anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. So
okay, so there's a lot of them. There's a ton of them, and it's easy to find a bunch to consider. But how do you actually figure out which one's right for you?
Honestly, practice and this. If you don't go into private practice necessarily, even like if you're a student or if you're in your internship, you're exposed to so many different things, and that might give you a little bit of an insight as to which conditions you might think about specializing in. But the more you see clients, again, whether it's in private practice or in other areas, you start to kind of figure out which ones kind of get you excited. Like I used to notice before certain appointments, there were ones that I was like, oh, I can't wait for this session. It wasn't because of the client, it was just the topic we were going to be talking about. Or like when I'm in a session and someone asks me about, ways to kind of incorporate a plant-based meal, for someone who was just starting to think about eating more plant-based, then I'm like all excited about it. So I think thinking about what excites you about nutrition. What are you passionate about?
I think one of the things to consider with this stuff, with specialization, no matter what you're doing, is it's tough. You have to come to terms with the fact that you are a unique individual and not everyone's the same, and there are things that get you excited that don't get everyone else excited.
That's very true.
That might not be obvious, but it's funny how it works out. You can see it happen in all kinds of areas and fields of expertise. Some people care about one thing and not another. I mean, look at the variance in taste of music. Some people really love country and some people hate it. But trust that will happen to you if you go into private practice and you start seeing clients, or during your internship, or at your first job, or even when you're just studying this stuff. If you're not even in college yet, you're studying it independently studying. There will be things that kind of pop out as more interesting than others. And it's not because those things are overtly and innately more interesting. It's because they're more interesting to you as a person. And you should pay attention to that. That's a good thing to pay attention to, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing. If something piques your interest, you should go after it.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen as a dietitian. You're going to find things that poke out and become more obvious to you. I feel like some of that gets lost in the sauce when you study this stuff, because I think people ignore that. I don't think they pay enough attention to that. That's just me with noticing things in general with other people, not just, I'm not a dietitian, but I've seen that people get excited about something and then they don't pursue it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a shame, really.
Yeah. And I think, on the flip side of that too, you might go into something, even maybe going into dietetics as an undergrad student, say, I want to do this, still keep yourself open to possibilities, because you might change and find that you're actually really passionate about another area. Or maybe you find that there's a certain area of dietetics that you enjoy learning about and studying about, but it's not necessarily where you want to spend your mental energy, or maybe it's exhausting. So I know a lot of dietitians who, they may have struggled with an eating disorder. They don't necessarily want, and they're passionate about like sharing that with others, but they don't necessarily want to counsel others on it. They want to focus on other areas because it could be maybe a lot for them, and that could be like draining. So they, draw that line. So it's okay to do that too, and have, passions, but maybe not choose that as your specialty and maybe just have that back information.
Yeah, that there's a dangerous thing of, you can theory craft that you'll love. And when I say theory crafting, I mean, you can think about something and think it's going to be awesome. And then you go to do it and it's not awesome. That can happen. That happens a lot. And, that happens with a lot of different things too. Like you can think and read about something and kind of mull it over in your brain like, oh, that sounds really cool. I'm going to do that. I'm going to be that guy. And it's a little dangerous because when you there's a big difference between thinking about something and reading about something and then actually doing the thing. Mm-hmm. When you start doing things, you start to notice stuff that you would have never known or picked up on if you didn't actually do it, if you were only reading about it or studying it. So maybe, I guess, a point here is that you shouldn't decide a niche until you actually get your feet wet. Yeah,
that's definitely... You want to get your feet wet. So even outside of the internship, if you're a dietetic intern and you're just kind of starting, that internship, it's so much. Like you're going into food service and clinical and inpatient, outpatient, all that kind of stuff. So, outside of that, you might have a whirlwind and maybe an idea, but when you actually get into maybe practice, whether it's in a job setting where you're working in a corporation or you're working for yourself in private practice, just take that time to kind of try things out, work with different clients. And then again, keeping kind of a tab to say, what appointments am I excited about? Or what appointments do I finish? And I'm like, oh, I'm feeling really good, and what were those things that kind of stood out to you?
Okay. So what are we recommending here as the path for actually figuring this out? Because what my assumption is, just based on the conversation here, is that if you're becoming a dietitian, you want to have a private practice, niching down is a good idea, but it's not something you should blindly jump into and decide before you actually get going. You should start, have some clients, have some appointments, get to know a few dietitians, get a little more acquainted with what the specializations actually are, and then start to pay attention to the stuff that excites you, the stuff that you like, and whatever piques your interest, and then go from there. And if you find anything that consistently excites you and that you're passionate about, maybe you've found your niche.
Yeah. And then even like testing it out a little bit too, whether it's like on social media or, presentations, like trying it out a little bit too can get you into that space, but also see, is it something people are kind of like, oh, this is good information, or that you're finding people are kind of drawn to it, like kind of seeing how it goes too can be really helpful. But then also in the same respect, there might be some dietitians who have been working for a corporation, working in a certain area and go into private practice and absolutely know what they're going to go into. So it's more about, again, just being able to work with clients first and then kind of figure out where you're going.
How did you find your niche?
Honestly, I started...
You keep saying honestly. Are you normally dishonest?
No.
Are you normally just full of crap? You're just lying and now you're being honest, finally?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Oh my God, guys. You hearing this right now?
I don't know. It was kind of like a transition because I was that person.
What did you think you were when you were in college? What did you think you were going to get into? Did you have an idea where you're like, all right, this is my specialization?
I was thinking honestly, like, actually I wanted to work in like a VA in like the mental health space, but then I realized that like inpatient was not where I wanted to work with like clinical stuff. I wanted to do outpatient. And then I just didn't really think of the mental health aspect outside of that because most of what we had learned about, that I learned about in undergrad, was focused towards eating disorders and not necessarily depression, anxiety, bipolar, all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of where I was thinking. So I didn't think that could be an area of focus. And then when I first started my practice, I was seeing everybody and I saw a lot of people with diabetes, but then I also was plant-based myself. And so I started to kind of bring that into the practice. And my focus really is on that beginner stage of plant-based. And that's kind of where I really like to be too. Like helping people transition, maybe not defining it as vegan or vegetarian, which is why I go plant-based. And it's more open. So it's kind of that beginner stage. And that was exciting to me to kind of have people, transition a little bit, or you have a plant-based swap, or even just like add more vegetables to their diet. And so being able to be in that space was exciting to me. It was something I was living, and it just kind of felt like the right fit. And then along the way, I did the personal training certification. And what's funny is I first thought like, I'm going to work with strength training athletes and like really intense gym goers and lifting heavy. And then I started to realize that like, I really like the beginner stage of fitness. Like people are just starting to get going, and the more the coaching and the motivational side of things. And now that I have my health coach certification too, I kind of feel like that is just a good fit for me. So it kind of felt like a transition over a couple of years where I kind of figured out what was exciting and what I was passionate about, what I was kind of living, and then also what was exciting when I was talking to clients and what was also sticking too.
So you gave an example earlier of someone who thought they wanted to get involved in mental health with nutrition, but they decided that wasn't their thing because that was what they were living, and now they don't. I think it was a hypothetical example maybe you gave.
Yeah, with like eating disorders in particular.
Okay.
Yep.
So, well, given your situation, how valuable would you say it is that part of why you got into what you are into now is due to your lived experience?
I think that is really helpful, but I also think, and this is where it's a very personal decision, sometimes, people have that lived experience. It can make them a better clinician, a better dietitian, and they have the lived experience to be able to share that. But then sometimes it can be hard mentally to kind of relive that a lot for them, or too triggering where they feel like they're in a good space, but constantly seeing someone in that space can be too much for them mental wise. So they are able to talk about it, but not be as in depth with like one-on-one sessions with clients all the time. So I think it really comes down to the individual where they kind of have to decide if it's too much or not. And I know some dietitians who, have struggled with an eating disorder, are very open about it, and they talk about their experience, and they work with clients who have eating disorders, but they have a smaller client load because it can be mentally taxing for them, because it's a lot more of the mental aspect than just talking about food and nutrition. So they kind of draw that line of they want to be in that space, but they don't want to burn themselves out. So.
All right, I'm going to ask you something. Now, here with picking a specialization, some people may have come to this looking for an answer. Mm-hmm. What should they specialize in? Mm-hmm. And there are some things to consider in terms of what you should specialize in, aside from the kind of cop-out answer of whatever's best for you, whatever you're passionate about. All right, let's try to be black and white here for a second. And I know this is probably going to be a little uncomfortable for you to give an answer to, but I think maybe this is possibly something someone's looking for. If someone's looking to get the most clients or make the most money, what should they specialize in right now?
This is a hard answer because I feel like it's going to depend on somebody's area.
In big cities, let's say.
Diabetes, anything heart related, cardiovascular disease as a whole.
So someone who lives in a metropolitan area, and if they just want to know, all right, what should I specialize in to get the most clients and make the most money? You're saying cardiovascular disease, heart disease.
Yeah.
Or those are the same thing.
Yeah. Diabetes. Yeah. I think those are the two big ones. I mean, if you think about the top killers in the United States,
aren't those two of them? Aren't those number one and number two?
Yeah. And then cancer, like oncology, which could be more on like the holistic side, but also in like integrative nutrition, but it can also be in conjunction with like typical cancer treatments too. So, I mean, honestly, if you look at that list of like what's the biggest killers in the United States or in your area, that's a good place to start. So you
could look and see what's big in your area. Well, I mean, isn't it the whole like first world that it's the biggest killers are heart disease and diabetes and
cancer.
Cancer and like, I think kidney disease is up there too, and stroke. I mean, this is all across the world. It's first world. Those are first world killers right there.
Yeah.
So if you focus on any of those, I think you're probably going to have a safe bet. Now, obviously, your priority shouldn't be how to maximize profit and how to secure the most clients. Well, I mean, maybe that's someone's top priority.
Yeah, but I mean, and even those, I would say for anybody, those should be the ones that that dietitians are the most competent in too, because you are probably going to see somebody who has diabetes or has high cholesterol. And so, even if you're working with people who have IBS, chances are you're still going to come across someone who has diabetes. So
you at least want a baseline competence in those things, but that kind of goes without saying, doesn't it? Isn't every dietitian going to have a baseline competence in those things?
Yes, but what I'm also saying is keeping it going in terms of keeping up with the latest research, the latest recommendations. So not just saying like, oh, I had information on that in my undergrad, which may have been 10 years ago, but to also, keep up to date, do continuing education on those topics that you may see.
Even if you don't specialize in them?
Yeah, just to have that baseline information, because you may still come across people who are not going to have more than one thing.
You're going to.
Yeah.
You're going to come across clients that have diabetes, heart disease, cancer in the family, or cancer risk. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Of course. But you could also specialize in one of those things, in which case, big money.
Yeah.
And if that's your priority, and some people, that's their priority. That's all they care about. How do I get the most clients? How do I make the most money? I mean, it is a job, Yeah. It's not really, I fail to see how that would be the most gratifying and fulfilling path. But to some people, that is the highest priority, making that money.
Yeah. And we talked a lot about like diseases and stuff too, but even things, and I mentioned sports nutrition, but even like family nutrition, working with families, working with pediatrics, like there's dietitians that specialize in pregnancy nutrition and breastfeeding, and so there's a lot of other things outside of like diabetes and heart disease, and that's where again.
Okay, so let me ask you that in like kind of a formal way. So the big bang ones, right, are like heart disease, cancer, diabetes.
Yeah.
What are the kind of up and coming / new trending things that someone could specialize in that are kind of cutting edge right now?
Definitely anything pregnancy related or breastfeeding nutrition.
They're getting more and more popular. There's becoming more of a high demand for that stuff.
Yes. And even what's called baby-led weaning, which is like a different style of feeding children. And that's not something, again, not my area of expertise, but there's a lot of really great dietitians in that space with feeding children and those first foods and how to get your child, your baby essentially, to be open to a variety of foods and have a big 100 first foods. One of the dietitians has, 100 first foods before the age of 1. And so there's that kind of space of pregnancy, breastfeeding, and then also like childhood nutrition is, I feel like, getting bigger, because also people are realizing that the habits you build with children are going to last them a lifetime. And it's,
Imagine that. Insane. Well, all right, let me ask you this, a bit of a weird, controversial question, maybe. Are there any specializations or niches you would recommend people stay away from, and why? Because there could be a reason here. While you ruminate, here's a possible reason why you maybe don't want to consider a specialization. And I'm not saying no one should ever study it. Maybe it's not one right for you, because I imagine there are certain specializations that require a wildly vigorous attack on staying up to date with the information that are so insanely deep, they can become the only thing you are able to do just to keep up with it. I imagine there's some specialization like that. Like there is with doctors, where it's like, it's the only thing you do because you can't afford to do anything else. It's so demanding of you to specialize in this thing that you can only specialize in that. Is there a dietitian version of that? I
don't think so. However, I will say that like weight loss and weight management was originally and some people still like consider themselves a weight loss dietitian. That has since become a little bit, I want to say taboo. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but that's been kind of a turnoff for people, with more of like the health at every size approach and like more body acceptance and focusing on behavior modification and health, not just weight loss. And so focusing on the habits first. It
sounds buzzwordy. It's kind of a turnoff. It sounds kind of cliche to say you specialize in weight loss these days.
Yeah.
Not a good angle. It used to be.
And it's not to say that, and actually a lot of dietitians that I've been working with have said, like, I don't really want to focus on weight loss, because it's not just about weight. It's there's the other fact, like what someone eats.
Yeah,
there's so many nuances to it.
You can't really focus on quote unquote weight loss without focusing on like 15 different other things.
Yes.
It's not like it doesn't really make any sense to think of it that way. That's not a productive way to think about it.
But that kind of, sometimes people think of it as being like a cop out, I guess, to say like, I specialize in weight loss, and and that's their big focus, because it's almost like everybody wants to lose weight. People are talking, and I'm saying everybody, but people want to lose weight. And I know how many people come to me because they have diabetes, but they're like, oh, I would love to lose 10 pounds. Like, that's always a part of the conversation. And it's not where I focus on with them, but
So I think it's funny, because if someone says if a dietitian says they specialize in weight loss, it's like a doctor saying they specialize in wounds.
Yeah, that's kind of...
And like all they do is slap a Band-Aid on something and like, oh, I'm a doctor. Wham. Oh, you have a big cut on your leg. Wham. Oh, your ear is bleeding. Wham. Band-Aid for your ear. Like that's what a dietitian's doing if they say they specialize in weight loss. It's a ridiculous... Oh, you're a doctor who specializes in being sick. Oh, good. That's really productive. Great. It's a useless specialization, because, if people need to lose weight, there's so many reasons they're not losing weight. There's so many reasons they could be obese. It's too big of a catch-all.
It is. And it's, and the behavior and the food, but also like what medical condition somebody has that can influence, how their body, how their weight changes.
Yeah. So if someone's a weight loss specialist, oh, so this person's overweight because they have a very specific disease. Are you an expert in that disease too now?
Yeah. Or like mental health conditions, a lot of the medications, they cause weight gain, and people won't even change their eating habits, and
they'll just gain weight.
And they gain weight.
Yeah, so not a good specialization.
Yeah, we'll probably get some hate for that.
All right, well, hey, whatever. I mean, that's whatever. I mean, but that's what I was looking for. So that is a specialization, quote unquote, that you should maybe consider staying away from. And there may be others, but that's a really good one.
Yeah.
All right. So maybe consider not that.
Maybe anything with that.
So what other specializations might be good that aren't related to either up and coming things or major metropolitan areas focusing on the major killers? Like, is there anything else that you like the idea of as a specialization that's maybe kind of like a sleeper hit that people aren't looking at right now?
Definitely like the food and mood connection, which I think is, again, given the times that we're in right now, also a piece that people are kind of focusing in on more too. And not just as like food is going to cure everything. That's not the idea here. And this is where, again, it is really important to be someone who is competent in this area to understand the nuances of mental health and being able to work with other practitioners, because this is a space where you don't work solo necessarily. You work with a team, or at least have a referral system. So if you do have someone who's in like an active situation that they need help, you need to be able to refer. So that's where you have these specialties where it's not just about the dietetics part, but being so in depth in it that you know of all these other things to be aware of.
So the connection between mental health and nutrition, you think, is kind of uncharted territory at this point.
Yeah, because I think, and when we think about eating disorders, that falls under that mental health sphere, but there's not a lot of talk on like depression and anxiety and the food aspect there, but then also like with more, with other conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar, and again, not necessarily that food is going to cure these things, but to even the management and what medications can then cause a depletion of certain micronutrients. So those kinds of things too, but in outpatient private practice, because there's inpatient, but there's also not a lot of outpatient dietitians that work in that space. And that's, I feel like, a lot of what people are looking for, the food and mood connection more so now too.
Okay. Quite a bit there. All right. I'm going to let's sum it back up. Let's recap here. All right. We're talking about niching down, specializing. We talked about what a niche even is. Should you niche? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
You should. It is better to do that, but you want a baseline knowledge first to draw upon, and then it's easier to figure it out. You could have multiple specializations, but it's probably better if they're related in some way.
Yes, absolutely.
And you probably shouldn't specialize in everything. You don't see football players who are quarterbacks and running backs and kickers. It just doesn't happen. There's a really good reason for it. So you can have multiple specializations, but it's probably better if they're related. And there are a lot of specializations where it's like 2 or 3 can easily be grouped together. Give me one right now, an example of a couple that are linked.
Oh, like diabetes and heart disease. So like high cholesterol
Boom.
and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. What was IBS and another one too, wasn't it?
Oh, IBS. I just see IBS. It's just tacked on. It tends to be tacked on
like
and everything. So
IBS and diabetes
yeah, I
would
see
be
that.
like 2 good together.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, so there you go. And then, so we talked a bit about scope of practice to kind of determine what's able to be a niche and how that might vary depending on where you are or what you're doing. We talked about things a dietitian can actually do a little bit. And we got into sort of different scopes of practice based on your specialization and how that kind of changes. It's not hard and fast. There's no official ruling where, like, if a doctor's a thoracic surgeon, they have to do a specific thing. It's not quite like that for dietitians. You can just say you're an expert, but there are things that you should do to responsibly declare yourself an expert.
And there are, I referenced, and we'll have this in the links. There's the scope of practice for dietitians that I mentioned before from the Academy of Nutrition, but they also have some recommended certifications that could fall under for different scopes too. So that could be helpful to maybe give you an idea of where to start too.
And then I think we went on a tangent about like how when you get deep into something, you like get like weirdly good at it mentally. I think the term we were looking for there was unconscious competence.
Yes.
And we kind of didn't mention that specifically, but that is the term. When you're so good at something, you're like really good at it without trying to be good at it. You can only achieve that by digging really deep and going really deep on that thing for like a long time. And then we got into how to figure out your niche and some things to consider. And then we talked about, all right, you want to make the most money, get the most clients? Stick with the big killers in the first world: heart disease, diabetes, cancer, stroke, whatever.
Yeah.
If we talked about up and coming stuff being, what was it?
Oh, baby-led weaning and like pregnancy nutrition and lactation, so breastfeeding, and then like childhood nutrition, those kinds of focuses.
Cutting edge stuff that's good to get into now if you want to get in the door on something that's kind of on the rise.
Yeah,
that would be some good stuff.
Was another one.
Plant-based is
food
another
and
one
mood too.
Well, we hold on. You're getting ahead of me here. That's not we didn't get there yet. We didn't talk about food and mood in this part.
Sorry.
That was a later thing. That was another thing. All right. So up and coming stuff, everything but the last thing she said, ignore that. And then we talked about maybe a thing to not specialize in is quote unquote weight loss, because if you're a dietitian that specializes in weight loss, you're a doctor that specializes in coughing. It's ridiculous. Frankly, it's absurd. And then we talked about one that you thought was kind of a sleeper hit that's not getting a lot of attention right now, that's not necessarily on the rise, but it's kind of uncharted territory. It's an area where discovery is yet to be made, and someone could really make a splash if they specialized in this thing, and that was food and mood.
Yeah.
That's why it's different. It's not on the rise right now. It's kind of a sleeper thing. People aren't paying attention to it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity there. If you want to be a sort of pioneer of a piece of dietetics, food and mood might be a thing you consider getting into. And if you do, Felicia might be on your tail, because that's something that it's getting into a little bit, right? You're kind of exploring that space too, aren't you?
Yep. I have another presentation coming up in January.
Boy, oh gee, she's doing presentations. She's the keynote speaker.
I'm not keynote.
Playing Carnegie Hall next week. All right. I think we kind of covered it here. Yeah. One day Carnegie Hall. Okay. That is finding your niche. Should you specialize? I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
And then for a bunch of stuff.
Yes.
A bunch of reasons that we outlined in this podcast. All right. I think that's a good point to wrap it up. This has been the My RD Journey Podcast. Thanks for joining us. This is Felicia Peraza, of course, PerazaNutrition.com, MyRDJourney.com.
Not yet. I have it. So
she's got the URL. You can't steal it and sell it back to her later for $3,000. No extortion. So, but she is on Instagram and Facebook as My RD Journey and Peraza Nutrition.
Yes.
Peraza Nutrition being your general practice. My RD Journey being to help you out, the dietitian, with all of your private practice concerns and needs. We're getting in there for the industry here. Trying to. A rising tide lifts all boats. I'm going to keep saying that because I like the way it sounds. All right. I think, are we good here?
Yeah.
Anything else to consider here for this?
I think you wrapped up everything really nicely.
Oh, great. Well, thanks. Okay. Well, this has been Felicia and Adam with the My RD Journey podcast. Again, thanks so much for joining us. Any relevant links will be in the show notes and description if you're watching on YouTube. And thank you for being with us.